Sometimes the most powerful move you can make isn't to shout, argue, or try to prove a point. It's to simply act like he never existed. Because nothing unsettles an ego more than being met with silence, indifference, and the undeniable proof that your life moves forward without it. His ego might have thrived on your attention, whether it was your love, your pain, or even your frustration. But when you stop feeding it, when you pull back completely, you reclaim the power that was always yours. And here's the beauty of it. You don't have to plan his downfall. You don't have to orchestrate his regret. Karma has a way of handling what the ego refuses to see. So instead of carrying the weight of revenge, your role is simple: walk away with grace, live fully, and let life show him what it feels like to lose someone unforgettable. Silence is often misunderstood. People think it's passive, weak, or a sign that you have nothing to say. But in reality, silence is one of the most powerful answers you can ever give, especially when you're dealing with someone whose ego fed on your reactions, your explanations, and your presence. For someone like that, silence is not emptiness, it's deafening. It communicates everything without you needing to say a word. It tells him that you are no longer available as his supply, no longer willing to participate in his games, and no longer standing in the shadow of his arrogance. And nothing punctures an ego more than being ignored by the very person it thought it controlled. When you were with him, every time he disrespected you, you probably found yourself explaining why it hurt. You laid out your heart, hoping he'd understand. And maybe sometimes he did, but most of the time, his ego just turned your words into noise, dismissing them or twisting them so that he could feel superior. Your voice became fuel for his pride, even if he pretended not to care. And that's why silence becomes such a sharp contrast. When you stop explaining, stop pleading, stop reacting, the game he was playing with your emotions ends abruptly. You take away the stage he was performing on. He's left standing alone with his ego, and for the first time, it's not being fed. The thing about silence is that it forces someone to face themselves. Words give them something to push against, something to argue with, something to manipulate. But silence reflects back their own emptiness. It leaves them no choice but to sit with the consequences of their actions. And that's when the weight of regret starts to creep in, because silence makes the absence of your love real. It makes the space you once filled undeniable. He may try to distract himself, convince himself it doesn't bother him, but deep down, silence is the one thing he can't control. He can't argue with it, he can't dismiss it, and he can't win against it. For you, silence is also a form of healing. Every time you choose not to respond, you're choosing yourself. You're teaching yourself that your energy is too valuable to be wasted on someone who didn't honor it. You're creating space for peace, for clarity, for the life you deserve beyond him. Silence isn't about pretending he doesn't exist. It's about acting as if his existence no longer has power over yours. And once you master that, you shift the balance completely, because now, instead of his ego dictating your emotions, you're in full control. There's also a deeper strength in silence, because it shows you don't need closure from him. Often we think we need that final conversation, that last explanation, that moment where they admit they were wrong. But silence bypasses all of that. It says, I don't need you to validate my decision. I don't need you to explain yourself. My peace is worth more than your words. That's liberation. And ironically, it's the very thing that makes him feel the sting, because an ego craves acknowledgement, even if it's negative. By refusing to give it, you deny him the satisfaction of thinking he still matters in your world. Eventually, silence becomes the loudest truth he will hear. Louder than any argument you could have had, louder than any revenge you might have sought, louder than any insult you could have thrown. It says, you no longer exist in my reality, And while he wrestles with that, you're free to rebuild, to thrive, to fill your life with people and experiences that truly honor you. Silence closes the chapter, not with anger, but with finality. It leaves him to face his own ego, and trust me, that is a battle he can't win. Detachment is one of the most underestimated forms of strength, because it doesn't come with drama, tears, or shouting. It comes with a calm, steady choice to stop giving your energy where it isn't respected. When you detach from someone whose ego thrived on your reactions, you remove the very oxygen that kept his pride alive. Ego feeds on attention, and whether that attention comes from your love, your anger, or even your heartbreak, it still counts as fuel. But the second you detach, the second you stop reacting, you break the cycle, and nothing disarms ego more than indifference. Think about it. When you were invested, he could always count on your response. If he ignored you, you'd reach out. If he upset you, you'd explain. If he pulled away, you'd try harder, and every reaction you gave reassured his ego that he mattered, that he had a grip on your emotions. That sense of control kept him comfortable, even if he didn't consciously admit it. But detachment flips the script. Suddenly, there's no response, no explanation, no reaction, and that silence says more than words ever could. It tells him, you no longer have access to me, you don't get to control my peace. Detachment doesn't mean you never cared. It doesn't mean the relationship didn't matter. It means you finally saw the cost of staying emotionally tied to someone who drained you. And you chose yourself. That's where the real power lies. Because attachment to someone's ego keeps you in the cycle of proving, chasing, and waiting. But detachment frees you from that prison. It allows you to reclaim your energy and redirect it toward healing, growth, and building the life you deserve. You stop making his behavior the center of your world and start making yourself the center instead. The beauty of detachment is that it shifts the balance of power without you even trying. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to force him to see your value. You don't have to bend yourself to fit his pride. By stepping back and showing indifference, you show him what real strength looks like. And for someone whose ego fed on validation, indifference is like a mirror reflecting back their own irrelevance. It shakes the foundation of the control they thought they had. He may try to provoke a reaction, to test if he still matters to you. But when you remain detached, when you respond with calm instead of chaos, he's left with nothing to feed on. And this is where karma comes in, because while you detach and move forward, he stays stuck with himself. His ego, once inflated by your attention, now feels the sting of emptiness. He'll notice the shift when you stop calling, when your social media no longer revolves around him, when your life clearly continues without his presence. And that's when the regret begins, not because you punished him, but because you simply stopped playing the game. That's the moment he realizes that your love was never guaranteed, and your energy was never his to own. For you, detachment also creates space for clarity. It's in detachment that you see the truth of who someone really is, without the fog of constant emotional investment. You realize that their ego never had real power over you. It only had the power you gave it through your reactions. By choosing detachment, you cut that cord. And in doing so, you teach yourself one of the most liberating lessons. That peace is more valuable than proving a point, and your silence is more powerful than any argument. So when you detach, remember this: you're not being cold, you're being strong. You're not being cruel, you're being wise. Detachment isn't revenge, it's freedom, and it's the exact move that starves his ego while feeding your soul. That's how you win, not by fighting for his attention, but by showing him you no longer need it. Silence has a language of its own, and it speaks far louder than any words you could ever say. When you choose silence instead of explaining, justifying, or pleading, you create a power that can't be ignored. Ego thrives on engagement. It wants a reaction, whether it's positive or negative. Every time you explain why you're hurt, every time you argue to prove your worth, every time you plead to be seen, you're giving his ego a front row seat to its favorite show. You're revolving around him, but when you withdraw into silence, you shut down the stage entirely. There's nothing for him to feed on, nothing to inflate him, nothing to stroke his pride. That absence of sound is what forces him to hear the loudest truth. He no longer exists in your world. Most people underestimate silence because it doesn't feel dramatic in the moment. We crave closure, explanations, or some grand speech that will finally make him see what he's lost. But the truth is, words rarely change an ego. In fact, they often reinforce it. Silence, on the other hand, strips him of the power he once had. He can't twist your words. He can't argue against your peace. He can't manipulate silence because there's nothing to grab hold of. All he's left with is the discomfort of realizing he no longer gets access to your energy. Think of silence like a mirror. When you stop speaking, he's forced to face his own reflection. He'll start asking himself questions. Why isn't she reacting? Why isn't she fighting? Why isn't she chasing like before? That discomfort is his ego beginning to crumble. For someone who was used to being the center of your emotional universe, silence is unbearable. And in that quiet, he begins to feel the weight of his own actions. That's where karma begins to whisper, because regret is born not in your words, but in his realization that the attention he took for granted has vanished. For you, silence is also healing. Every moment you stay quiet, you're reclaiming the energy that was once spent explaining yourself to someone who didn't care enough to listen. You're no longer wasting your voice on ears that only wanted validation, not understanding. Silence teaches you to sit with your own peace, to no longer need him to acknowledge your worth because you've already acknowledged it yourself. It creates space for you to breathe, to reflect, to build, and to move forward without the chaos of constant explanations. And silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you've elevated above the level of needing to argue. It means you've stepped out of the game entirely. Silence says, I don't need to prove myself to you anymore. I don't need to convince you of my value. My absence will say it all. And trust me, absence screams. When someone who was always available suddenly isn't, when someone who once answered every text now doesn't, when someone who once gave attention now gives none, it shakes the ego more than any outburst ever could. There will be moments when silence feels uncomfortable, when you'll be tempted to break it just to feel some sort of release. But remember this, breaking your silence often only feeds his ego again. Every word you speak gives him another chance to dismiss, argue, or downplay your feelings. Silence removes that opportunity completely. It's not about punishing him, it's about protecting you. So don't underestimate the power of saying nothing. Silence is not the absence of communication. It's the clearest statement you can make. It's you choosing dignity over drama, peace over chaos, and self-respect over validation. And while he wrestles with the emptiness left behind, you'll be filling your life with new energy, new experiences, and new joy. That's how silence wins. It doesn't just starve his ego, it nourishes your soul. Indifference is one of the most misunderstood yet powerful tools you can ever use when dealing with someone whose ego tried to dominate your life. People think indifference means coldness, bitterness, or revenge, but in reality, it's the exact opposite. Indifference is peace. It's the moment you realize you don't have to fight, you don't have to prove, you don't have to explain. You simply stop caring in the way that feeds his ego. Indifference is not about hate, it's about freedom. And when you show someone that you are no longer emotionally tied to them, it delivers a blow to their pride deeper than anger ever could. Ego thrives on the idea that it matters to you, whether through your love, your tears, or your frustration. As long as you react, he knows he still holds a place in your emotional world. Anger tells him he still matters. Sadness tells him he still matters. But indifference tells him he's irrelevant. That's the one thing the ego cannot handle, because when you stop reacting altogether, you prove that he no longer has influence over your life. His presence, his choices, his actions no longer affect your state of mind. And that is the sharpest cut to someone who once fed off your attention. What makes indifference so powerful is that it doesn't have to be announced. You don't need to post about it. You don't need to declare it. You don't even need to say a word. Indifference shows itself in your actions. You stop checking his social media. You stop wondering what he's doing or who he's with. You stop rearranging your life in the hope he'll notice you. Instead, you invest in yourself. You pour energy into your goals, your passions, your friendships, your happiness. That's when indifference becomes a natural byproduct of self-love. You don't force yourself to act like you don't care. You genuinely don't. And the irony, that's when he starts to notice, because people who rely on ego expect you to keep orbiting around them. They expect you to be predictable, to always give them the reaction they crave. But when you change the script, when you stop feeding their pride and redirect that energy inward, it unsettles them. They don't just miss your attention, they feel the absence of being significant in your story, and that's not something they can easily shake off. For you, indifference is not just about him, it's about healing. It's about teaching yourself that your emotional world doesn't have to rise and fall based on someone else's behavior. Indifference builds resilience. It reminds you that you don't need validation to feel secure. It teaches you that your peace is worth more than any reaction. When you embody indifference, you're not pretending to be strong. You're actually becoming strong because you're no longer bound to the highs and lows of someone else's ego. Indifference is also the cleanest form of walking away. Anger keeps you tied. Bitterness keeps you tied. Even obsessing over revenge keeps you tied. But indifference cuts the cord completely. It says, your chapter is closed. I'm writing the next one, and you're not in it. That's where the real liberation is, because it's not about punishing him. It's about protecting yourself and elevating your energy beyond his reach. And here's where karma plays its role. When you act indifferent and truly mean it, life has a way of showing him the weight of what he lost. Not through your hands, but through the natural order of things. He'll see you thriving, not because you're trying to prove a point, but because you genuinely moved on. And in that thriving, in that lightness you carry, he'll feel the emptiness of his own ego. That's when regret creeps in, not because you wanted it, but because you were strong enough to let go without looking back. Indifference is not about pretending he never mattered. It's about deciding that he doesn't anymore. It's not about erasing your history. It's about no longer letting that history dictate your future. And when you master indifference, you don't just take your power back, you keep it, because nothing he does can touch you anymore. That's how you win. Rebuilding your life after walking away from someone whose ego once overshadowed you isn't just about moving on. It's about creating a new version of yourself that no longer needs their validation. Feel whole. This is where your true power emerges, because while they may have believed they were the center of your world, you now get to show, not through revenge or bitterness, but through action, that you are the center of your world. Rebuilding isn't about proving to him that you're better off. It's about actually being better off, regardless of whether he ever sees it. When you start to rebuild, you redirect all the energy that was once wasted on questioning, doubting, or trying to earn his attention back into yourself. That energy becomes fuel for growth. You dive into passions you neglected. You strengthen relationships with people who truly value you. You explore opportunities that excite you. And little by little, your life starts to feel full again. The beauty is that you don't have to announce it, you live it. And in living it, you naturally radiate a kind of confidence that no one can take away. Ego-driven people often believe that when they leave you broken. They imagine you stuck in the same loop, waiting, longing, wishing for their return. But nothing breaks that illusion faster than you rising, evolving, and thriving. Not because you want to send a message, but because you chose to prioritize yourself. Your healing becomes the karma. Your progress becomes the lesson, and the irony is, the more you focus on your life, the more he begins to feel the void of no longer being part of it. Rebuilding also allows you to redefine who you are without the shadows of the past. Sometimes relationships make us shrink to fit another person's comfort zone, or we lose sight of who we were before the connection began. Walking away gives you the freedom to rediscover that version of you, or better yet, to create an even stronger one. You start to ask yourself, what do I really want? What brings me joy? What kind of life do I deserve? And in answering those questions honestly, you begin building a life so rich and meaningful that the thought of going back feels impossible. The process isn't always glamorous. There will be days when it feels lonely, when the silence feels heavy, when you'll question whether you made the right choice. But those moments are part of the rebuilding too. They teach you resilience. They force you to sit with discomfort and realize that your happiness can't depend on someone else's presence. That strength builds a foundation that no ego can ever shake again. And here's the secret. Rebuilding doesn't just benefit you, it sets a standard. Once you've rebuilt, once you've felt what it's like to live a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval, you'll never settle for less again. You won't allow someone with a fragile ego to control you, because you'll know what it feels like to be free. That's the gift you give yourself, and whether he sees it or not, that's also the quiet karma. Because he'll know, consciously or not, that losing you meant losing someone who not only cared deeply, but also had the strength to walk away and flourish without him. Rebuilding is your victory lap. It's not loud, it's not spiteful, and it's not about showing off. It's about finally aligning your life with who you really are and what you truly deserve. And once you're in that place, no amount of ego, pride, or regret from his side can touch you. You've already won because you've created a life where his existence no longer defines you. That's the truest form of power, and it's the one thing no one can take back once you claim it. The greatest revenge, though it was never really about revenge at all, is living so well that the person who thought they could diminish you becomes irrelevant in the story of your life. When you act like he never existed and let karma handle his ego, the final step isn't to wait for his regret or sit around hoping for his downfall. It's to flourish so completely that whether he regrets or not becomes meaningless to you. Thriving is the loudest statement you can make, and the most beautiful part is that it's not directed at him, it's for you. When you thrive, you send a clear message without ever having to speak. You were never defined by him. Your worth was not attached to his recognition, his attention, or his approval. He may have thought he was the sun you revolved around, but by thriving, you prove you were always your own universe. The moment you start building a life filled with love, laughter, purpose, and joy, you become untouchable. Because thriving isn't about appearances, it's about genuine fulfillment. It's waking up in the morning excited about your life, surrounded by people who truly value you, engaged in work or passions that light you up. That's the kind of energy that cannot be faked, and it cannot be ignored. Ego-driven people rarely expect you to rise after they've left. They expect the silence of regret, the bitterness of loss, or the endless cycle of hoping they'll return. But when you thrive, you break every expectation. Suddenly, the image he had of you, small, dependent, desperate, is shattered. And that's when karma plays its part. Because karma doesn't always look like something dramatic happening to him. Often, it looks like you flourishing in a way he never imagined, in a way he never thought you could without him. That realization alone can be the sharpest sting to his ego. But thriving isn't about proving a point. That's where people get it wrong. If you make it about showing him, then you're still tethered to his validation. Real thriving happens when you shift your focus entirely to yourself, your healing, your dreams, your joy. You thrive because you refuse to let the past define you, because you deserve a life that feels good every single day, because you know your story is so much bigger than one failed chapter. And when you genuinely thrive, his ego is left to face itself while you move so far ahead that looking back doesn't even cross your mind. There's also something magnetic about a person who thrives after heartbreak. People notice it. Friends admire your strength, new connections are drawn to your energy, and opportunities begin to appear because your confidence makes you bolder. Thriving isn't just emotional, it's practical. It shows up in the way you carry yourself, the way you set boundaries, the way you no longer accept scraps of love. That's when you attract not only better people but better circumstances, because you're finally operating from a place of abundance rather than lack. And here's the final truth: thriving makes regret irrelevant. Whether he regrets losing you or not no longer matters, because you've built a life that doesn't hinge on his recognition. His ego may crumble, karma may catch up, but by then you're already too busy living a life that feels rich, whole, and authentic. You've transcended the need for closure, the need for revenge, the need for acknowledgement. Thriving gives you something far greater than validation. It gives you freedom. So let him deal with his ego. Let karma handle the rest. Your only job is to flourish so brightly that his absence fades into the background of your story. Because when you thrive, you don't just walk away, you rise above, and that is the ending he never saw coming and the future you always deserved. Walking away like he never existed, acting with silence, indifference, and peace. It was never about him, it was always about you. His ego may have thought it held the power, but what you've proven is that the real power lies in how you respond, in how you choose to live after. You don't need to punish him, you don't need to chase him, you don't even need to hope for his regret. Life has a way of dealing with egos. Karma will do its part in time. But your part, the only part that matters, is to rise, to rebuild, to thrive so unapologetically that his memory feels like nothing more than a shadow that passed through your light. This isn't about erasing your history, it's about refusing to let it define your future. It's about taking the lessons, keeping the strength, and leaving behind the pain. It's about proving to yourself, not to him, that you can create a life so beautiful, so full, so rich, that whether he watches or not is irrelevant. His ego may wrestle with regret, but your heart will be free. And freedom is the sweetest form of closure. So let him fade, let karma do the heavy lifting. You, on the other hand, walk forward with grace, knowing that your greatest victory is not in his downfall, but in your rise. Because at the end of the day, the ultimate statement you can ever make is this: you are always more powerful than his ego, and your life thriving, radiant, unstoppable, is the proof.